All right, for our second part of today's discussion, we wanted to discuss whether Kamala Harris's election loss in the 2024 presidential election was more about a rejection of Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party or the Democratic Party, or an embrace of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And this is in the backdrop of there's been, since Kamala lost, there's been a lot talked about the Democrats and losing the working class and whether they, too woke or this and that. There's a lot that's going around about that. And a lot of it, is hindsight. But at the same time, there surely are lessons that can be learned in terms of, one, how we got to this situation, and two, whether or not what we're hearing, because we're also hearing a lot about how, this is the country moving to Trump or, something like that in the Republican Party and so forth. So, sorting that out as well, because a lot of times going straight to the most abstract point or the broadest point can get you to a good answer, and other times it can't. So, Tunde, just kind of starting it off, do you think, just with the primary question, do you think that what we're seeing here is more about an embrace of Donald Trump and the Republican Party, or, kind of a rejection of either Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party because of who they are, or maybe because of what they're about or what they're talking about and so forth?
I think you mentioned it a little bit. I think there's a little bit of reality in the various opinions we've been hearing. I think it's a little bit of both in terms of that. I do think, one of the things I've been very careful of since the election, I've been very conscious of this feeling also between this information that we're all consuming now about the why this or that happened, as well as things like the reaction of the stock market. I keep thinking of that saying, fools rush in. And I remind myself not to do that. And I'll say this now about kind of mentally not being a fool to just rush in and try and say, oh, it's this or that. Because I see a lot of that. And to your point, I see, the Democratic, let's say, leaning folks are more fractured, of course, because they're, some people are blaming the far left and wokeness. Others are blaming that, the more centrist left forgot about the working class and all these kind of things that we hear. And of course, Republicans are happy because, they won the election. So we have all these competing kind of narratives right now. But I do think one of the things that I realized, James, and I think, we did a recent show on the book Nexus, and we've done other shows in I'd say the last year or so that have kind of brought me to this realization that I really realize I've had some blind spots. This is really a really interesting time for me to reflect.
Mea culpa. Here we go.
Yeah, I didn't realize, honestly, man, because more of being a more rational, reasoned, intellectual type of person, I was the type of person that believed that more information would just solve something, right? That if you just tell people, hey, this and that's going on, they would be like, okay. What I never appreciated was really that all of us human beings, we still need things packaged in a story and in some sort of, to put the information in a formation of understandability. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying a story that is disinformation or propaganda or that kind of thing. I'm just saying a story that people can get behind. And what I'm learning is,
just for clarity, those are forms of story too. But
yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at. Is
it's not inherent.
But that's what I'm getting at is what I realized looking back now is that both the Democrats and Republicans were telling two different stories to America. And yeah, maybe the story that I saw coming from Donald Trump, this is where I'm saying, to your point, I didn't necessarily believe that story. I didn't believe that Haitians were eating cats and dogs. I believed that the border needed work, but I didn't believe that the border was an existential crisis that would make the American people go away, or that would replace people like me, because I feel like I'm an American, right? I didn't feel that, the transgender issue, as much as we've had shows about it, and I can acknowledge that I'm uncomfortable with that topic at times, but it wasn't a hill I was ready to die on, thinking that was going to stop America. So what I realized is Donald Trump was much better in the Republican Party at telling a story to Americans. And that story had a direction. The Democrats lost the ability to tell stories to Americans. And that's kind of like, we can now break that down, but I just feel like from top down, that's kind of what I realize here.
Well, see, I don't think that that's true. I think the Democrats told a story. I think the biggest issue was that the story the Democrats told was about, what did they say? It's Dobbs and democracy. I just don't think that resonated. Like, I look at this election And what stands out to me the most is that Trump, as far as his vote, like if you compare the popular vote from 2020 to 2024, as of right now, he got 74 million and change in 2020. He got 75 and change in 2024. So within a million or so votes, so he got pretty much the same amount of votes. Donald Trump got pretty much the same amount of votes. All this stuff we could talk about, it's not like he got a ton more votes or anything like that. He got, about the same. Whereas if you look at Joe Biden's performance in 2020, he got around 81 million votes, right? Harris got around 71 million votes. So this big drop, where you see the big swing, is that the people who voted in 2020 for the Democratic candidate were not excited and did not come out and vote. A large number of them, a substantial, more than 10%, did not come back out. To me, that means their message missed the mark. You trying to motivate, maybe the democracy question was motivating in 2020. Maybe it was. Maybe there was other messaging. Maybe it was an anti-incumbent because the economy wasn't going great and stuff in 2020 that got people out in 2020. And you may have misdiagnosed and said, oh, okay. So to me, the biggest issue here was, and we're seeing this, and you see this play out. I'll bring up some comments of Bernie Sanders in a second. But what the Democrats decided to make central to the campaign was not something that a large number of people that otherwise had been inclined to work with them, that they found compelling. It might have been compelling to a certain segment of the Democratic base, but it wasn't compelling broadly to the Democratic base. And that brings you to the Bernie Sanders, which he's come out with recently, talking about, I'll quote him from his X page, "It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned the working class would find that the working class has abandoned them. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change." I think he's onto something there. Now, I don't think, though, that that's necessarily why she lost the election. And just to nuance it a little bit, and I'll kick it back to you, I think that the Democratic Party has abandoned the working class, and I think that's a terrible thing. And they've become, from an economic standpoint, they basically, starting with Bill Clinton, really, they became Republican light. Like they weren't banging the drum for the working class. They were just like, hey, we just won't go as far for the corporate class as the Republicans will, but we'll still kind of bend over for them. So I think that's true. But I think the reason they lost the election, if they had been the exact same party, but had spent the whole election talking about economic stuff and all the stuff they were going to do economically, I think they would have performed much better. What we see, and this is hindsight to some degree, not completely, but that the economic concerns were what was going on. And by Democrats not making that the central or a central focus of the campaign, they just weren't able to galvanize enough support to, Trump has his ceiling. Trump hit his ceiling. Harris underperformed the Democratic ceiling, and I think that is reflective of them choosing the wrong messages to make the campaign about.
Yeah, or you can just believe that the Democrats stole the 2020 election, and this proves it. So that'll be the new truth.
Or you could say that Elon Musk stole this election. By suppressing.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
So
that's
starting. You can play that game forever.
I know, but listen, getting back to serious stuff is. Because I think you're right. I'm not arguing the point about the Democrats losing the working class, because that is traditionally who they are supposed to represent. And again, that's something that is, like we said in the first discussion of the show, if you're going to address loneliness as part of the issue of how to deal with humanity going forward with AI, addressing the needs of the working class is also a long-term game plan. This isn't something that you're just going to fix in 4 years like that, especially as the minority party, now the party out of power. So I think that that's a big part of it. So there's no denying that. I think there's just other things also that in this election I think affected, because you're right. One thing Donald Trump and the Republicans were very good at is telling the story about inflation. Now, whether you and I personally believe that they're going to address it the way that many people think they are, doesn't matter. That's what I mean. That's what I realized. It doesn't matter.
But they talked about it like it was a big deal.
Yeah,
which
it's just that they addressed it. Yeah, exactly. And that was my blind spot because, I'm fortunate enough that I'm able to not be bothered if my grocery bill went up 50%, $50. I mean, when I go to the grocery store every week, and I don't say that to knock anyone. I'm just saying that I'm in my own bubble. That's what I realized. I realize how important that is for a lot of Americans, and that's okay. Like, it's like, okay.
Said another way. just real quick, said another way, like what you're saying there is like the inflation issue was an abstract issue to you. It wasn't like a day-to-day life. I gotta get, like you said this to me offline. Like someone has to, I can't do this because of this inflation on groceries. I can't go and hang out with my friends now. So that's something that's gonna affect you much differently than it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand. The numbers say inflation is up. It's a little inconvenient for me. But so yeah, it hits you less hard, so to speak.
Yeah.
Not just like literally, but also kind of subjectively in your own, in your own gut.
Yeah, and so and that's why I think part of the other big stuff, because I think the working class thing is huge, and I do agree that if society, I mean, it's been proven throughout history so many times that we don't even need to go into it too much. But obviously, if there's too much income inequality, you get the environment where things like bigotry and xenophobia are much more easier for someone to come in and foment because people feel more scarcity. They don't feel abundance.
Anti-immigration.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and so that's why I say it's all related. And so that's where I want to get. I want to actually bring this up and then get your feedback on it, because there's a couple interesting tie-ins I see. One is the other story that I think was big. Now, just saying for this election cycle, not 10 years ago or 10 years from now, was the immigration discussion. And, I've been thinking lately in my head, because when I was a kid, I was born in 1978. So my memory begins in the 80s with Ronald Reagan. And I've shared this with you in the past that to me, Reagan was to me more of an inspirational leader in terms of his eloquency and his dialogue, because he told a story of America, the shining city on the hill, that to me was kind of the post-World War II 20th century version of America that I grew up with, which is, you got all this crazy stuff going on. You had Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini, and you had Pinochet in Chile, and you had Castro in Cuba. But we in America will welcome all these people because we're the big melting pot. And so I remember Ronald Reagan, one of his final speeches in I think 88 or 89, right before he left office, was that you can come from anywhere and go to Japan and move to Japan, but you'll never be Japanese. You can go, from anywhere in the world, move to Germany and not be a German. But only in America can you come from somewhere else and move here and you can become an American. And I've been thinking about that lately because 40 years later, we have the RNC this year, the Republican National Convention. People held signs that said mass deportation now. Yeah. And that's kind of what I realized is the story, the narrative has changed. And what Donald Trump was successful in telling a story, which the Democrats weren't. And like you said about economics, instead of standing their ground with their own story, they just kind of went Republican light and hugged the Republicans, which was, this is no longer the place where we're going to welcome everybody that way because these people are coming in to replace you. That became the story. And then Democrats, what they do in January for the immigration bill that Trump helped blow up, they went harder. They said, okay, as Democrats, we're just going to become like Republicans, or we're going to shut off asylum and all this. What I'm realizing now is, again, whether someone agrees with me or not, the Democrats lost because they try to tell a story like Republicans, but they're not Republicans. Everyone knows that. What they should have done is stood up for the ideals of Democrats and said, no, we don't want open borders and we don't want criminals coming in. But you're not going to use this fear as a way to shut everything down from immigration. And just should have told the story that Ronald Reagan told. And that's what I realized.
But that's Republican light too, though. But see, here's the thing. I think that what we're talking about and what my overall point initially was the misalignment in the messaging that they chose versus the mood of the country. And so I think what you have to recognize is that with inflation going on, as you just mentioned, I think it's an excellent point that in times of scarcity, immigrants are one of the first things that any society look at and be like, yo, man, like this ain't gonna work. This isn't gonna work. And so the mass deportation and stuff, while I don't agree with that, I recognize it as a very strong strategy because that hit the economic concerns of people in a way that was even deeper than if you say, oh yeah, we're going to do a stimulus checks and stuff like that. Actually, you are satisfying you're addressing the concerns about the economy with people when you start talking about deportation at a very deep level, and so actually I think that was part of an economic message that, hey, there's things aren't good. I mean, I think you pointed out, we go from the shining city on the hill to American carnage. And so, and that's trying to capture a mood. You know what I'm saying? This is why I think there were two things that the Trump campaign did, I think, that were, in hindsight, again, very smart. One, they had messaging that was geared towards keeping their people motivated, ready to vote. And then they had messaging that was designed to discourage or to point out, like, hey, if you're not doing great right now, then why would you sign up for another 4 years of this? And I think that exposed, and without counter messaging from the Democratic Party and Harris that's focusing on, hey, we're gonna switch this up. We know that, like, we know you're hurting, and we're gonna make it right. And that's kind of Bernie's point. Bernie's point is really talking about policy, though. I think that, again, people talk about stuff in politics all the time. Like Trump's answer, this tariff thing, this answer to the inflation is the worst answer you could imagine. It wasn't about the policy. It was the fact that that people have this concern, and his rhetoric was designed to say, I have a solution to this concern, And so I think that in that instance, and I will say this, though, I think that while, we've heard sexism, racism, and stuff like that, I think those played a role. I don't think I don't think that's a role that you walk away from and say, if we just avoid sexism and racism, we'll be okay. Yeah. I think that, like, that's something that, it played some marginal role. I'm sure it played something, but I don't think that was determinative here. More determinative, I think, was, remember, 2024 has been an anti-incumbency year, and that's on both sides of the political spectrum. Right-wing governments have been taken out. In UK, the right-wing people took the biggest losses they ever had this year, and in other countries it's been, left side, all that. So it's been an anti-incumbency because of inflation primarily.
Yeah.
This is an anti-incumbency environment. So if Harris wasn't coming in and saying, hey, here's how I'm going to change it to get the economic system going, then not only was she going up against this hurdle, this anti-incumbency hurdle, then she wasn't even meeting the moment with the right message that would resonate. And so, and again, I think that is revealed in not that Trump had a huge bump in votes, but that Harris couldn't hold together the people that already voted for her as the vice president on the ticket.
Yeah.
Again, she wasn't like somewhere, in Kalamazoo, like in 2020, she was on the ticket,
Yeah.
So people already pulled the Biden Harris lever when they were talking about stimulus checks and all that other stuff. But, ultimately, like, I don't think that, like, I think that they missed the signal. And for whatever reason, you talk about blind spots, I think that's very on point. So, I mean, ultimately, like, we've also heard, and I want to get your thought on this, that, like, potentially we're looking at changes in voting blocks, and, like, whether we've seen masses of college educated people of all races moving more towards the Democrats, and we've seen working class, non-college educated workers of all races moving towards, and that's not saying there's a majority, but just moving towards the Republicans. We've seen men move more towards the Republicans, women move more towards the Democrats. Do you think that we're seeing anything lasting that's happening here? And again, not acknowledging that anything that may be happening is ongoing and this stuff is fluid, but do you think we're having some lasting changes, or do you think this is more relevant to the anti-incumbency bias, the missing the mark of their messaging, or even what Bernie's saying as far as, hey, you guys have abandoned the working class, so over time you're going to start losing them?
Yes, I think so. To answer directly, yes, I think we're seeing the beginnings of a shift. I wouldn't say that the entire political stars have realigned, but I think for you and I that are born, in the 70s, we're seeing it for the first time in our lives. The last time was probably during the 60s with the Southern strategy, when the Southern Dixiecrats went to the Republican Party and, African Americans went to the Democratic Party, because a lot of younger people may not appreciate that the Republican Party prior to the mid 60s used to get almost, 30 to 50% of its votes from Black Americans. And so what I think is we're just seeing a realignment of political kind of alliances. But I don't think it's over. I think we're in the early stages of it. So I'm not going to try and predict how it plays out. But I do think, because I just think that we're now losing the living memory of the civil rights era. People are older, and a lot of younger people just aren't caught up in the cultural battles of the 50s through the early 70s. So I think that's happening. But I also think that a part of it is going back to the stories. You made a great term just now that stuck out in my mind, which was the mood of the country. And I'm going to say something that I don't think many people will recognize, but there is a through line between Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And they're very different men. And of course, they're very different in their politics and ideology. But if we remember in 2007, what got Barack Obama popular to win the Democratic primary and then eventually to become president was because, number one, he was newer on the scene. He wasn't George W. Bush or Hillary Clinton or John McCain or one of these folks. But without being, the same type of rhetoric as Donald Trump, actually, Barack Obama was pushing a America First, quote unquote, message. We were in two wars that were unpopular. He was talking about getting out of the stupid war, remember, and finishing Afghanistan, a certain way. He was talking about, remember, he got accused by Joe the Plumber of being a communist because he talked about spreading the wealth around and the roads you didn't build that. Remember all that?
And it was also similarly, it was a time at 2008, a time when incumbency
tough economy.
Not a good time to be an incumbent.
Yeah. So really, without the xenophobia, the domestic message between Trump and Obama when they were both initially campaigning, Trump in 15 and Obama in 07, was very similar. And I think that's what allowed both men, because Trump in 2015, when he was on that stage, remember, bashing Jeb Bush for his brother getting us into the wars. He was talking about how he couldn't be bought like these other politicians. So what I'm saying is
about how the economic system was rigged.
Was rigged against, yeah. So what I'm saying
sounds a lot like Bernie, yeah.
Yeah, and so and look, it's no surprise that Bernie Sanders was extremely popular in 2016, right? And the kind of progressive left and the working class left, or I say all working class, has a right to be angry with the Democratic elites and the establishment because we found out through the Russian leaking of the emails, this is all connected, right? That they were actually putting their thumb on the scale internally in the Democratic Party for Hillary Clinton. So we got here from both parties over time, and we can maybe add in the Citizens United allowing all this money to come in, but that's a different show. But just to finish
that's
off,
the biggest factor.
But that's a separate show. That's a totally separate show. But I'd like your thoughts, James, on that, which is what most people might not be seeing, because you said something when you said the mood. The mood in 07 was similar to the mood in 15, which gave us Trump and Bernie in a sense, which became the mood again this past year in 24. So I think the problem is that actually we're being distracted with this Democrat-Republican thing because Americans seem to have been unhappy for the last generation, ever since the Bush administration.
Rightfully so, though, because once the Democrats abandon the working class in terms of really going, and one of the things Bernie cited, for example, is that, hey, how come we don't bring any minimum wage legislation to the floor, and really go to the floor for that, go to the mat for that? How come he's pointing at those things, and I agree. There is no party that is trying to advance that truly is trying to advance the interests and go into the mat for the needs of the working class. The Republicans, I look at the policies as the Republicans as, and let me say it like this. Actually, this is because I think this is part of the faulty assumption that the Democrats make with this. I think the Democratic Party assumes that because the Republican Party and its platform, its policies are hostile to working people, it's anti-union, it is all about consolidation of wealth at the very top. They think that because that's actually the policies that are put in place by the Republican Party, that workers will reflexively, keyword there, reflexively, stick with the Democratic Party as saying, okay, well, the other side is completely anti-me, so I got to go with these other people, even though the Democrats actually aren't advancing the cause of the working people. They're just not going as far as the Republicans are in favor of the wealth class. And it's like, well, hey, man, that's a terrible approach.
I mean, it's like it's like Diet Coke versus Coke. You know what I mean? Most people that's what I'm saying. At this point, I think that's what the working class said. We'll just take the real Coke again. I'd rather have some sugar.
And that's what Bernie's saying. And again, like I said, I think that saying that she lost the election because of that is not necessarily accurate, because I think even if the Democratic Party was still working in the interest, not just not going as far for the wealthy as the Republicans were, I think the issue here was that they didn't campaign. They didn't center the campaign around it. Not that they don't actually do that. Because again, if it was about whose interests were really being served, then the working class wouldn't move to the Republican Party. It's not about who's actually doing the work. It's about
story.
What are you talking about? What are you making people? Do people feel heard by your needs? Or do they feel like you're talking? And I'm like, no. Like you said earlier, like, the inflation thing, it'll all catch up. Your incomes are going up. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the inflation. Like, what do you mean don't worry about it? That's not the answer that people want to hear. And so I think that this assumption that, oh, they'll come home because they see that these other people are going to cut the taxes on the wealthy, are going to increase income inequality, are going to break unions and stuff like that. They'll come home because of that. That's a bad assumption. If you have to make these things salient in people's minds, and you have to keep them salient in people's minds. And I would endorse the approach of Bernie also to say, hey, let's also take care of working class. But see, and the biggest thing, and I don't want to go down this road, but I got to mention it because I'm here. The biggest issue that I have personally, in my personal views on this stuff is that the kind of New Deal approach where you do ensure, you don't let wealth accumulate too much at the top. You keep the velocity of money flowing. The money gets up to the top. Some of it can stay, but a lot of it has to keep coming back down, get put back into the economy, and then it comes right back up again. And you keep that cycle going. That New Deal style is the only thing that's been shown to work in an economy like ours. You don't need to incessantly borrow money. When we do the Trump economy or the Reagan economy or the George W. Bush economy, we got to borrow $1 trillion a year, or more, so that doesn't work. When we do the Republican light stuff, it doesn't really work because we're not putting enough money in the economy, that not letting it stick at the top. So personally, for me, the craziness about all of this is that nobody is advocating for the only type of an economy that's actually been proven to work and deliver a huge middle class, a prosperous middle class, and an economy that grows by leaps and bounds every year. And that's what we had with the New Deal economy. So, and it had kinks. You had to work out the kinks, but the delivering like that, nothing else has done, in the last 100 years. So,
well, one of the things, let me just piggyback on that because that's a great point.
Yeah, go ahead. But then we got to get out of here. So I hate throwing it in like that. But
no, well, here's the thing, and that's why, because let's just give me a minute to get this out. One is, that is where we can have a separate show on this. The money in politics matters because it doesn't escape me that, it's been about 15 years since the Supreme Court really whittled down about 100 years of prior laws about campaign finance and all that. So now, you're right.
Whittled
the party
down
of
or wiped out, however you want to.
That's right. Let me get it out.
The stuff that was put in place after the Gilded Age. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, but that's what I'm saying. It's important for people to know these things are all connected. That now the reason why Democrats had to become Republican light is because they couldn't compete once you allow billionaires and large corporations start writing checks like Elon Musk did in public this year, saying, I'm just going to spend $45 million a month at the end of the last couple of months of the campaign. How many people does Harris have to go raise money from at $25, $100 a pop? So the idea of, the system protecting the collective, meaning the labor class, from the very small oligarch class was dismantled by the Supreme Court. So Democrats also have to run to very wealthy interests to win elections. And what's that naturally going to do? Once they win, they can't go tax those interests. So that's one.
That was kind of the point of the Citizens United, is to make both parties beholden to them.
But that's what I mean. We should do a separate show on that. But the last thing I'll say before we get out is I also think Democrats, and I look back on this seriously, they also lost the story of America. They allowed Republicans to frame who is an American and to take that culture. Because the reason I felt that is it hit me with this election. Tim Walz is the first Democrat I've seen in a very long time to have his name stenciled on a camel hat. The fact that they were showing the American flag so much at the DNC. What I'm saying, and the fact that when I put on Fox after that, Republicans were upset saying, hey, the flag, that's ours. And so what I'm saying is Democrats need to get back into behaving patriotic and saying, we love this country too, because I think they've abdicated that to the Republicans. And when the average person who's not into politics looks and they're seeing all these American flags and this Americanism on the Republican side, and then the Democrats are like, yeah, we're for everybody, and all this, constellation of different isms and Latinx and blacks and Latino, and trans people, it's confusing. And it's easier to say, oh, America first. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think especially for immigrants, they want to be American. They don't want to be in all this constellation of stuff. So, I think the Democrats have to get better at storytelling. That's
no. I mean, we got that, but no, and I think you're right.
It's like that feeling, like of Americanism. That's what I mean. What Reagan gave us.
what it breaks is that there's an aversion to kind of a nationalism, but see, nationalism is not the same as patriotism. Like we are trying to build something collectively here, and part of doing that is feeling good about what you're trying to build. Exactly. And so you have to own that, you have to live that. So I mean that's good. I mean that's something that should be done, and effort should be made to do that, to make people feel good about what we're trying to do here, and not always be seen as, while you want to critique and make things better, you don't always want to be seen as the person who is always unhappy about whatever's going on, So, I think that all of those are lessons. And so my hope is just that, like, as you know, both of us have said it, like our hope is that we can get both political parties competing for Americans' votes and actually trying to help Americans. The two-party system really only works when both sides are kind of trying to pull America to a better place. And then arguing about how to do that. Like we're not necessarily there right now, but that doesn't mean that's where we are now is where we're going to stay. But the miss that the Democratic Party, I think the story of the 2024 election is kind of the miss of the Democratic Party. They're just to us be standing here a week later and just see how completely and thoroughly they missed the mood of the nation and what they were talking about, whether that was because they took the wrong lesson from 2020, or maybe the whole democracy thing worked once, but it just wasn't going to keep working over and over again, and again, I support the Constitution and the democracy, but I'm just saying that looking at the numbers, clearly that was not the priority, that the urgency was not felt on that in the same way that it was felt on other issues, and they just missed that completely. So I think we can wrap this from here. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.